All right, dear friends. L'chaim, l'chaim. Good evening, good evening. This is our fourth class on chapter 39. Wow, we've had quite a go over here. Look at this. Look at how many pages this is. A lot of pages. One second. Is this our second or third class? It's our third. I think it's our third class, right? Am I correct? Third class. Third class on chapter 39, which means I get four classes. I'll do four classes on it. That's not bad. This is the idea. We're learning about kavana. What's kavana? Kavana means your relationship with Hashem. There's a relationship to be had over here. You could do a mitzvah with zero relationship. You could do a mitzvah with a very deep relationship. And what we're learning is two things. Number one, the relationship, the kavana, is extremely important. The presence of mind, your emotional presence. What are you doing this? Why are you doing this? That's extremely important. It's an integral part to the mitzvah. Point number two that we've been learning is that there's different levels. There's a spectrum of how deep this relationship could go. And we know that in life, there's all different levels of relationships. There's different depths of relationships. And there's different types of relationships that you could bring into your Judaism. What is your relationship with God? This chapter 39, is all about walking us through different kinds of relationships and trying to show us that the different types of relationships that we could have are actually reflective of different levels of the spiritual worlds. And this is here to show us and teach us just how vital this kavana is for our mitzvahs. And the way it works is like this. When we do a mitzvah, we don't sense that anything grand just happened. We don't sense anything grand just happened. Which means the effect of a mitzvah does not hit the radar of our five senses. But something very big happens. Now, if our mitzvah has more kavana, less kavana, again, we don't see any difference. So if we want to understand what actually is happening, what's the difference? How does a mitzvah become greater? When there's a deeper level of kavana, the only way to understand that is by trying to understand and seeing what it looks like in the spiritual worlds. And what we're learning is that even though here on earth, we don't get to experience in a visceral sense, in an experiential sense, the power, the beauty of the mitzvah, but in heaven we get to experience that. Before our souls came to earth, it was a godly being. It was godly in essence. It had an appreciation of God, of the truth of God. The only problem is that it wasn't in a relationship with God. It stood at a distance. The relationship that our soul gets to make with God happens here on earth. When a soul goes back up to heaven, what it's experiencing is the depth of the relationship that it created with God here on earth. And that's the paradox. Here on earth, we don't even necessarily feel it in a very acute way. We get to really experience it in heaven. But in heaven is not where the relationship is made. The relationship is made down here on earth. The mitzvah itself, the Torah study that we study itself, that is God. That's us coming into contact with God. We can't do mitzvahs in heaven. Even studying Torah can't really happen the way it happens here on earth. So we learned that there's different forms of relationships. The deeper the relationship, the higher you go. Or in other words, the higher the relationship, the more beautiful the relationship is. The spectrum of these relationships, it's on this spectrum. How much did you allow God to enter your life? And that goes together with how much did you create space for God in your life? And creating space for God in your life means that you have actively removed some of yourself, some of your ego, and some of your interests to allow space for God's interests in your life. That's the way it works. So at the bottom end of the spectrum is somebody who is not willing to sacrifice anything, not willing to allow any space that will inconvenience his schedule, his interests, his hobbies. But if there's space, yeah, he's happy to allow God in where there's space. Yeah, I think I've got a few square feet in the back corner there. I got some space for God there, which means I'm not creating any space. And then we go higher and higher. There's an active effort of a Jew. The Hebrew word for this, the Hasidic word for this is bittul. Bittul is a very powerful word. Bittul means I'm creating an empty space and I'm allowing God in. And that's sometimes a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of courage. You're sacrificing my own ego, my own expression of myself in my entire life, and I'm making space for God. The more that we do that, the deeper it is. We need to have, says the Alter Rebbe, at least a minimal level of a relationship with God. That's what allows a relationship to blossom, that there's actually kavanah, there's a presence of God in our lives. But there's all different forms of it. There's all these different spiritual worlds. There's the world of Yitzira, that's the world right above us. We're in world number 4. More specifically, we're at the bottom of world number 4. That's the lowest level of expression of the truth of God within the created environment. There's the world of Yitzira, where there's a deeper relationship with God. There's a world of Bria, which is a world where the presence of God is so strong that it's transformative. It really pulls existence and creations out of their sense of being and transforms them. That's a higher world of Bria. So we in last week's class, especially, not last week's, but last class, which was actually 2 weeks ago, right? The week before we learned with last week, we had a discussion with Tzvi. So last class we learned about the kavanah of the 2 middle worlds, world number 3 and world number 2. We're in world number 4. And without totally belaboring all the points again, the 2 types of kavanah that we've been speaking about was a kavanah which is more instinctual based, where we're just trying to inspire the relationship that we all have within our souls, versus a transformative kavanah that comes through deep intellectual awareness, which is when there's such a deep level of understanding, and that understanding and that recognition is so transformative that it makes you into a new person. You can't see life the same way again. Like they say, you can't unsee that. That's a higher level kavanah. You have such a deep appreciation of God mentally, cognitively, in your understanding, that's transformative, and you're not the same person again. And you emotionally react very powerfully to that. That's a much higher form of kavanah. That's the world of Bria. So the Alter Rebbe gave us the 2 middle worlds. What we didn't discuss yet is the highest world and the lowest world. The highest world is maximum kavanah. The lowest world is 0 kavanah. Or even negative kavanah. Negative kavanah is bad kavanah. That's even worse. No kavanah is neutral. Then there's sometimes even ill intent or bad reasoning. That's not good. The rest of the chapter is going to be showing us the highest, and then we're going to learn about the lowest. And also, we're going to start seeing how all these ideas are going to start coming together. Why is the Alter Rebbe telling us about all this mystical stuff? On that note, let's begin with page 305. Part 3 of the chapter, Kavanah of the highest world of Atzilus. Dear friends, welcome to Atzilus. Just kidding, we're not actually going there. But this is the highest world, the highest experience. What's the world of Atzilus? Says the Alter Rebbe. Let's start learning. And as for the world of Atzilus, this is a world that is beyond the mental capacity, grasp, and understanding of a created intellect. This is number 1. A creation, which we all are, angels are also creations. Creations can't begin to fathom the truth of God, which is present on the level, in the world, in the experience of Atzilus. Why is that? Continues Alter Rebbe. Because there, in the world of Atzilus, God's Chochmah, Bina, and Dat is utterly and perfectly merged with Him, with a merging that is more awesome and wondrous, with infinitely more power and vigor than in the world of Berea. Very esoteric paragraph over here. What does that mean? In every cell of the world, there's the presence of God. In other words, God is radiating. There's a presence. Every cell of the world, though, the way God is manifest there, the way God is radiating there, is at a lower level, is more compromised. We can think about that even in terms of our own life. Who really knows you? And the real truth is, we create what we'll call garments or concealments over our personality, over the truth of who we are. Think about it. When we present ourselves to others, we are presenting ourselves, which basically means we are creating a version of ourselves, and then we project that version of ourselves onto others. Even clothes. What's clothes? I don't want people to look at me naked. I'm presenting myself, right? I need people to look at me a certain way. And I'm going to have people look at me, but not in the raw. Nobody gets to see me in the raw. No one gets to see my raw thoughts. Nobody gets to see my raw emotions. I carefully curate a presentation of what I want people to see about me. And we all do that. We call that basic inhibitions or social cues. Social cues are, there's a way to act, there's a way to behave, there's a way to be present. Which in other words mean that we are not projecting the raw truth of who we are to others. We are giving a version of ourselves. So too with God. When God creates the world, God is radiating energy, his presence, but in a very highly curated way. It's a presentation. And we're going to explain this a little bit more. But the world of Atzilus is the truth of God without any filters, or with barely any filters. Think about who we are when we're in our home, nobody is there, we're in our own bedroom, and we simply get to just be ourselves 1000% with no inhibitions. It's just the raw me. It's highly personal, right? That's only for like a spouse. No one else gets to have the raw, real, uninhibited, unfiltered me. And even a spouse, it's never even 100%. That's very raw. Leah's saying, would that be our essence here? You could call that the essence. It's not 100% the essence, but it means just absolutely the raw you. Somebody wrote a letter to the Rebbe in the 1940s. This was before the Rebbe was officially the Rebbe. And he wrote to the Rebbe that he's having a hard time understanding. What does it mean, four worlds? It's one of the issues that when people hear the word four worlds, they think it's somewhere between Jupiter and Pluto, Like, which planet is this exactly? No, these aren't physical worlds. These are levels of experience. The same way we have within ourselves different worlds, different levels of experience. These are not spatial. These are not within the world of the five senses. These are experiential. These are truths that are beyond time and space. So he said he's having a hard time understanding the concept of four worlds. And the Rebbe gave an analogy of a king. The way the king presents himself to a nation. And there's different levels of access. Different levels of the way the presence of the king resonates throughout his entire kingdom. Chassidus relies very heavily, and really Judaism as a whole relies heavily on the metaphor of a king and his subjects. And our world doesn't have a lot of kings, but thanks to Disney, people have a pretty strong relationship with the idea of a king and a monarch and the subjects and castles. It's wonderful. What would we do without Walt Disney, huh? That is not an endorsement. Okay. Think about a king. So there's different levels, the way the king's presence is felt in the land. Even on the hillsides, in the countryside of his kingdom, everybody knows this is this king's kingdom. He is felt a little bit. His presence is felt throughout the whole kingdom. But you can't compare the way his presence is felt in the countrysides to the way it's felt in the capital. The whole capital has a whole different energy. This is the king's capital. And the capital is built around the castle. The king is in the castle. It has a whole different energy. The presence of the king is so much more felt. So it's so much more present. And then you can go into the palace itself. It's a whole, it's just a whole different experience when you're inside the palace. And then there's the way the king is within the throne room. The presence of the king is so, so powerful in that room. But then the Rebbe says, there's the personal living quarters of the king. As powerful as the king is in the throne room, when he's sitting on his throne with his crown upon his head, the king is still projecting an image of himself. It's not him for himself. It's him as he rules a nation. But then there's the king, the way he takes off his crown, takes off his royal garbs, and goes to his own private quarters. On the one hand, he doesn't look that impressive anymore. He's just another guy. But on the other hand, that's the real king. That's the raw truth of the king. It's not a projection. It's not role play. It's just the raw truth of the king. In a certain way, that's the most sensitive thing. Who gets to see the king in his private quarters? Nobody besides his immediate family. That's the most personal, the most intimate. The world of Atzilus is where the truth of God shines and radiates with zero inhibition, with zero garments, with zero presentation. And the problem is that the way God is manifest in that raw way, we have no understanding of God on that level. We can only relate to God as God presents himself to us as a creator or on a more limited level. The world of Atzilus, says the Alter Rebbe, it's beyond the intellect. We cannot appreciate it with our intellect. Maybe we could access it other ways, but not through the intellect, which means using human tools, you can't relate to it. Let's continue learning a little bit. And as we learn, we'll maybe understand this a little bit more. I know it's very deep. There in the world of Bria, which means once you go down one world, in the world of Bria, there already the light has been downgraded so that it shines in a diminished, limited fashion, in order that created intellects can receive God's chachma, bina, and dat, allowing them to know God and to understand and grasp something of the blessed infinite light within the intellectual capacity of their created minds, which are confined in capacity and limited in scope. We are limited beings. As the Alter Rebbe says, we are confined in capacity and limited in scope. The human mind has limitations. And the basic limitation is that we can only relate to finite things. Here's a quick little mind experience. I want you to imagine an infinite table. Infinite table. Are you imagining it? Tell me when you're imagining an infinite table. You have it in your head? Okay. I have a question for you. Infinite table. What is the height of your table? Is it, regular tabletop? Is it bar stool height? Is it like a kiddie table, low down? What's the height of your infinite table? Do you have a height in your head? If you have a height, then it's not an infinite table. If it was infinite, it can't have a height. It can't be limited to a height. So your table can't have a height. What material is your table made out of? Is it wood, granite, plastic, glass? I've got news for you. If it's a material, then it's finite. It's not infinite. You're limiting it. It's wood, it's not metal. That doesn't work. So your table can't have a material. So on and so forth. Is your table square? Is it oval shaped? It can't have a shape. A shape is a limitation. A shape is finite. So the real truth is, our minds cannot imagine an infinite table. In other words, the moment you realize you have to let go of all these properties, what are you left with in your mind? Black, blank, nothing. We have zero concept. The human mind cannot even begin to relate to true infinity. So the moment we discuss the concept of infinity, the human mind has zero concept. We cannot even imagine it. Our minds go blank. Okay, let's go even further. Let's go even within the finite world. Even within the finite world, we suffer that our minds reach a certain maximum and the imagination can't go further. Here's an example. I want you to imagine an elephant in the hole of a needle. But the needle doesn't grow. It's still a tiny needle hole. And the elephant remains the same size, 6 tons. All right? The elephant's not shrinking. I want you to imagine the entire elephant, full size, inside a needle hole, actual size. Can you imagine that? No, it's impossible. You cannot imagine something finite that's too big fitting into something finite that's too small. So forget about infinity. Even within the finite world, our imagination hits limits that we just can't even begin to imagine. The truth of God is something that human beings are incapable of truly relating to. You don't have to have any fancy Kabbalistic reasons. We have zero relationship to infinity. We don't even realize how so handicapped our minds actually are from truly relating to something a little bit outside of the basic parameters of our universe. It's pretty amazing, no? In the world of Bria, once you reach world number 2, God's presence is already so curated, it's downgraded, diminished, limited. Oh, all of a sudden it's a version of God that human beings could start relating to, and even that's difficult enough. In the world of Bria is when you start to learn, where the truth of God that we could learn about in Kabbalah, that's from the world of Bria. Even that is very, very difficult stuff for the human mind to comprehend. But at least it's somewhat within the world of comprehension. With enough training, you could understand it. But even that's not the truth of God. That is a downgraded, relatable version of God. You understand what's going on over here? Atzilus is the raw truth of God shining within an experience of reality. This is why also the world of Atzilus is not a world where anything is created. It's a world of just the truth of God shining. There's no creation. Creation only begins in world number 2. Because world number 1 doesn't allow. The environment just doesn't allow there to be something that feels independent and with a basic sense of I am. That intuition that I am, we call that ego, a sense of somethingness. You can't feel that in the presence of God. In the raw presence of God, it's impossible for anything, even the highest angel, to have a sense of independent identity. So nothing exists in the world of Atzilus. It's the world of raw truth of God shining and irradiating. Only in world number 2, the world of Bria, where it's already a more limited version of God, could the very genesis, the very, very early beginnings of creation, in the most sublime and the most abstract sense, begin to formulate. Let's continue reading. This diminishment in the world of Bria is necessary in order that their existence, meaning creation's existence, as a separate creation, should not become obliterated. If you see the truth of God, your sense of creation becomes obliterated. You can't exist. And without this diminishment, they wouldn't be creations at all any longer. Rather, they would simply be reabsorbed in their source and root in godliness itself. That's what it says. If any created being had real access to the truth of God as it is in the world of Atzilus, they would just simply lose their identity and become reabsorbed back in their source. They would be zapped and become God again. Not that they would become God, they would just be reabsorbed back in the truth of their source. Okay, so the world of Atzilus is this awesome world, the truth of God, and there's such a powerful truth of God shining there that nothing could exist there. It's 100% God, 0% ego. That's at the top of the spectrum. So, says the Alter Rebbe, so in the world of Bria, it is this diminishment that enables the blessed, infinite ones, Chachma, Bina, and Das, to reach and illuminate these created souls. The diminishment allows souls in the world of Bria to have a sense, a comprehension, an understanding of the truth of God. But in Atzilus, there's relatively little diminishment. So it's impossible for created intellects to receive this light of God's undiminished intellect. That is why we say that no thought of theirs can grasp him at all. Next page, right? There you have it. In truth, no one and nothing could truly grasp God. You could understand God? No. You could maybe understand a limited version of God, the way it appears in Bria, or the way it's even more diminished in the world of Yetzirah, the next world. But the truth of God, as it is in the world of Atzilus, nobody can understand. All right, dear friends, that was your crash course on what the world of Atzilus is. Sounds exciting, no? Now, there are certain souls that could serve God and have kavanah, have a relationship with God, which is on the level of the world of Atzilus. That they are in tune to God in such a deep and powerful way that it's to the point that their ego and their sense of existence is down to zero. How could that even be? Says the Alter Rebbe, that is only the greatest tzaddikim, the greatest righteous men and women. There's regular tzaddikim. We're talking about the top, highest tzaddikim. A very rare breed of souls. Let's see how the Alter Rebbe describes it. And by the way, spoiler alert, we have no relationship. This is not in our wheelbarrow to have kavanah, to have a relationship with God, which is on such an intense and deep level. But we're going to learn about it. But it's not that we could relate to it. Let's learn. Top of page 306. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, Atzilus is only the repository, which means it's only the heaven, of a few, especially great tzaddikim. Great big tzaddikim. What does their Judaism look like? Says the Alter Rebbe, for their divine service is on a level that vastly transcends even the intellectually generated reverence and love, which comes from understanding and recognizing God's greatness. So even what we described till now, the higher level kavanah, which is a kavanah that comes from a very deep intellectual awareness and recognition of God, the great tzaddikim, it's so much greater than that, infinitely greater than that. What is it? Their service reflects Atzilus. It is just as the world of Atzilus vastly transcends the Bina and Das that is accessible to a created intellect. Their relationship to God is totally beyond the idea of a soul developing an understanding and an appreciation and a recognition of God. So what does the relationship with God look like? Totally different. This is the description. Rather, their divine service in their lifetime was on the level of an actual chariot to the blessed infinite light, to the blessed infinite one. That their separate identity is lost in His. And through the observance of Torah and mitzvahs, they and all that is theirs become absorbed in God's light. These are tzaddikim that it's not that they create a lot of space for God in their life. It's tzaddikim that their entire identity is nothing other than God and what God wants of them, to the point that it is intuitive to them. They're like a chariot. They're a conduit. A chariot is the idea that somebody goes into a chariot and the chariot takes them places. A wagon takes you places. And it goes wherever you want. Think about somebody that their whole identity in life is not their hobbies, not their interests, not their emotional life, but they are nothing other than a vehicle for God to be manifest in this world. Very few Jews. They have no identity. Even in their sleep, they are expressing God. It's a whole different life. We say this about Moses. Moses does something which is a little bit weird, and we say this every single day. It's a mitzvah to say the Shema every single day, twice every single day, actually. There's 3 paragraphs of the Shema. Okay, so the first paragraph is the most famous, right? It starts with Shema, Hear, O Israel. Then we say V'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God, right, with all your. The second paragraph is the longer paragraph. It says V'haya im Shemoa, Shemoa Tishmu B'koli, and if you will listen to my voice. And God describes blessings that will come if the Jewish people will listen to God, and God will give good rain and the produce will grow well. You know what the interesting thing is? Do you know who's speaking those words? Not God. It's Moses. And it's very, very weird because, one second, we're not listening to Moses, we're listening to God. Moses just gave us the information, but it's God, not Moses. But Moses says, and if you will listen to my voice, I will give you rain. What, Moses gives us rain? God gives it. What's going on over here? This is in the Shema. And our sages say very simply, when Moses spoke, it was God speaking right through his throat. There was no daylight between Moses and God. What do you mean Moses spoke? That was God speaking. If Moses moved his finger, that was an expression of God in this world. There was no identity Moses that was separate from God. There was no ego to Moses. He was 100% plugged into God. When Moses said me, he meant God. There was no me of Moses. That's Atzilus. That's the service of the world of Atzilus. You're 100% plugged in. I'll share with you an unbelievable story. And by the way, the Baal Shem Tov, the great tzaddik, the Baal Shem Tov, said about the Alter Rebbe before he was born, when his parents were pregnant with him, when his mother was pregnant with him, the Baal Shem Tov said that God is preparing to send down to this world a soul of Atzilus. A soul from the highest world. That's what the Alter Rebbe was. But I'll share with you a story about the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shalom Dovber. Takes us back a little bit over 100 years ago. Rabbi Shalom Dovber was a Jewish leader, a fearless Jewish leader. At the very end of the era of the Tsarist government, of Tsarist Russia, and those years, Jewish life was going through a lot of turbulence. And he was fighting for the preservation of traditional Judaism. And they had these state-sponsored conferences of rabbinic conferences that rabbis would come to. And that was really where the government would help, would create policy for Jewish life. Jewish life was pretty regulated under the Tsarist government. It's unlike today, we have a lot of religious freedom. Can you imagine if the White House would tell us how to be Jews and who could be rabbis and what institutions we could have and how these institutions have to look like? It wouldn't be good, right? But in Russia, that's what it was like. So he was at one of these rabbinic conferences and he was fighting. Whatever the issue was, there was a lot of tension between traditional Judaism and the Enlightenment movement, which is known as the Haskalah, the Enlightenment movement. And the Enlightenment movement wanted to change the fabric of Jewish life. They wanted to secularize Judaism, and they were very powerful. They had a lot of money. And this was, from what I understand, this is one of the big issues, how to preserve traditional Judaism in Russia, and that the government shouldn't literally shut down traditional Judaism. The story is like this. They're at this conference, and it's very tense what's happening there. They're having these deliberations. What do we do? There's voting. And it's one of the evenings of the conference, and all the rabbis are back in their hotel rooms. I think this is in St. Petersburg. And the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dovber, he's there in his hotel room, and he's meeting with another great leader of Russian Jewry. His name was Rabbi Chaim Brisker. Rabbi Chaim Brisker is a world-famous Torah scholar till today. The patriarch of the great Soloveitchik family, which is a family of great scholars. Okay, Rabbi Chaim of Brisk. Rabbi Chaim of Brisk was not a Hasidic Jew, but he had tremendous respect for the Lubavitcher Rebbe of that time, Rabbi Shalom Dovber. Rabbi Shalom Dovber Schneerson. And they were discussing what to do about something. What do we do about a certain issue? And the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dovber, says that my gut feeling, my instinct is that we have to do this. And it was a very daring decision. It was a very, very weighty decision. He said, my gut feeling is that we have to do this, whatever it was. So Rabbi Chaim Brisker, who's a brilliant Jew, he is a real scholar. He understands what it means to think an issue through. He tells Rabbi Shalom Dovber, he says, Lubavitcher Rebbe, And since when do we make decisions based on gut feelings? What type of business is this? We're making big decisions on gut feelings. We have to think the matter through. So Rabbi Shalom Dover said, no. Generally, you're right, but my gut feelings are trustworthy. And he said like this. He says, ever since I was a child, I trained my body to be automatically in line with the code of Jewish law. And if my body does something, it's because that's coming from the code of Jewish law. If I have an instinct, if I have a gut feeling, it's coming from the Shulchan Aruch. It's coming from Jewish law. That's what it means, the soul of Atzilus. It's not that I'm here and I somehow make some space for God in my life, or even I make a lot of space for God in my life. It's that I don't have a life. My entire life is that I'm a vehicle, I'm a conduit for the Word of God, for Jewish law, to be present in this world. It's the highest form. That's pretty powerful, no? Okay, says the Alter Rebbe. Let's continue reading inside. Such tzaddikim resemble what the sages said. The patriarchs were genuinely a chariot to God. This is what our forefathers were. For all their days, the patriarchs were connected to God on such a level. This is what it means. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their wives. It's not that they listened to God. They were the presence of God breathing and living here on earth. An unbelievable thing. But says the Alter Rebbe, but 1 second. But take it easy. This is only for the great tzaddikim. Don't think that you have access to such a kavanah, to such a relationship with God. Says the Alter Rebbe, but then there are those whose soul root may be too low for such a perfect level of worship of Atzilus. To consistently shed your self-identity and become absorbed in God's light through your divine service. To reach such a level, not every soul has that. Such a soul might only achieve it occasionally, which means the best case scenario for the regular souls, or even the greater souls, is to have an experience of Atzilus only occasionally, at certain times which are an auspicious moment above in heaven. Okay, page 307. For example, what would be such a moment? Such as during the Amidah prayer, which has the consciousness of Atzilus, especially during the bows during the Amidah, since all bowing is an expression of Atzilus, as stated in Pri Eitz Chaim and its commentary on welcoming the Shabbos, because the theme of bowing is the dissolving of your identity in God's light to be literally like nothing in His presence. Okay, we're not going to get into this, but there is an idea that if you really pray properly and you get into the spiritual energy of davening, Amidah, and especially the bowings of Amidah, is a moment where your soul could a little bit experience and be present in the world of Atzilus. Okay. I'm not saying I ever did this. I have to confess. I can't say I ever had this experience. This is high-level stuff, to daven and get into the spiritual, tap into the spiritual reality of the time of prayer in such a real way that you actually feel that during the Amidah you're in the world of Atzilus. That's your experience. Okay. But the Alter is saying that, that's the best case scenario that any other soul who's not a big tzaddik could maybe get access to. It says the Alter Rebbe, but ultimately, such a soul's primary soul location is in the world of Bria. The maximum a soul generally is going to have access to is a relationship of the world of Bria. And only occasionally, at an auspicious time, will this soul rise to Atzilus, at special moments of personal inspiration, which are known as feminine waters, as is known to those well-versed in Kabbalistic esoteric wisdom, which we're not going to be getting into right now. Okay. That was a mouthful, but I'm not saying there's not a lot of depth over here, but we're not going to focus on it. Okay. The point of the Alter Rebbe is that this is not necessarily in our deck of cards. To have such a deep relationship with God, which is in the world of Atzilus, this is the highest level. Okay. Here's the crux of the issue. Here's where the Alter Rebbe really starts bringing the whole chapter back down to the point. Middle of page 307. Let's learn. All right. Okay. Says the Alter Rebbe. Now, the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. What's the reward of a mitzvah? A mitzvah. What does that mean? The Alter Rebbe gives a very interesting interpretation of this phrase from our sages. The reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Meaning that from its reward, you can know the mitzvah's quality and level. The reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah. You want to know what a mitzvah is? Look at what its reward is. So what the Alter Rebbe is saying is, how are we going to know the power of the mitzvahs we do here on earth? Well, let's learn what those mitzvahs do up in heaven. So everything we just studied about, a tour of heaven and the tour of what our mitzvahs accomplish in heaven, is only there to help us appreciate here on earth what the power of a mitzvah is. And says the Alter Rebbe, we don't need to be concerned with esoteric levels. It's not our issue, the deep levels that are beyond us, which are namely the great tzaddikim who are in the level of a chariot, which is unattainable for most of us. Right? So what we just described earlier today from the world of Atzilus, that's beyond us. We rather need to focus on those things revealed to us, things towards which every person ought to aim. We need to focus on the kavanah that we are able to accomplish and do here and now. And says the Alter Rebbe, you need to have a profound recognition of the spiritual quality and level of your divine service. We need to be very well aware, and we need to understand the different levels of how we could relate to God and how we could make our Judaism more special, more of a relationship. And says the Alter Rebbe, if it's done with palpable fear and love in your heart, and that results from cognition and recognition of God's greatness, then the spiritual address of such a Judaism is in the 10 Sefirot of Bria. That's a higher form of kavanah. And next page, and a Judaism motivated by the inherent reverence and love that is felt in the mind, its spiritual address is in the 10 Sefirot of Yetzirah. Says the Alter, the point is that we need to learn this chapter. We need to well understand the different kinds of kavanah, and we can help us understand by understanding which world it goes to, and to understand what it means that these are different relationships, because this is very relevant. This changes the energy of our Judaism. How does it change things? We'll continue learning about that in the rest of this chapter, and in the next chapter, chapter 40. We'll really understand it in chapter 40. How different levels of kavanah actually change the quality, the dimensions of your Judaism. But that's for today. Next week, we're going to be learning about what happens when there's no kavanah. Till now, we're just talking about different levels. What happens if I do a mitzvah or study Torah and there's no relationship with God? What happens then? And then there's even another question. What happens if somebody does a mitzvah for bad reasons? What happens if somebody studies Torah for bad reasons? So there's one problem if there's no kavanah at all. What happens if there's negative kavanah? We have a kavanah, but it's a bad kavanah. It's done with ill intent. We'll learn about that also next week. And dear friends, that's what we got for today. L'chaim, l'chaim. It's a little bit shorter, but it's very heavy, so we can't do too much at once. And thank you all for joining us on this Tanya journey. We'll see you all soon.
Yeah, I got it. Can I ask you a question?
Of course, of course.
So I got the impression from the way we spoke over a period of time that the different worlds are repositories for the souls, our own souls at different levels. And when you talk like that, it sounds to me, even though it's a spiritual world, but like it's a world, an actual world. But then when you talk about it in our world now, the world of Asiya, it appears that it's a level of emotionality and spirituality that puts you into one of these worlds. And to me, it's confusing.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. It's a little bit difficult to have a very good grasp on this concept. It's a good confusion. It would be a lot more worrisome if you thought that you had absolute clarity on what all the four worlds are.
No idea.
When you don't understand something, that's really good. Okay, we've got a lot to learn. So what I'll say is, it's It's a good confusion. Let's keep on studying. Every time we learn a little bit more, it'll fill in the gaps. And I'll be honest with you, I also have a hard time understanding it.
Okay, all right, go rest
So it's
up.
okay. We're all in the same boat. We're all just trying to learn and understand a little bit more every single day.